I'm Jeff Ingber. I've worked in the financial industry in legal and compliance capacities for several decades, including holding senior positions at Citibank, Depository Trust and Clearing Corp, and the New York Fed. I'm very pleased to have with me Anandi Tyagarajan and Manu Agarwal. Anandi, based in Delhi, is a vice president and truly a transformation leader in Genpact's global banking and financial services area. Manu, based in New York, is a vice president in the Everest Group who manages financial services and healthcare and life sciences programs. So why are we here, and why are we so pleased that you joined us? Well, for many years, it's fairly clear that financial institutions have struggled to attract and retain a pool of quality anti-financial crime talent. And that pool of talent remains, in spite of all the great advances made in technology, a compliance program's most valuable asset. There's still no doubt about that. The problem of attracting and retaining talent is worsened with the growth in application and importance of anti-money laundering and fraud risk management, the truly snowballing requirements and expectations of regulators, and an environment of increased demand and low unemployment. Now adding to this burden is the need for an anti-financial crime workforce able to work with new artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies. Financial institutions that can't adapt their workforce to the demands of this new augmented human intelligence era will not survive. It's as simple as that. It's not an exaggeration to say that this is an existential issue for banks and other financial institutions. In this webinar, we will review, among other things, what talent means in this new era, as well as optimal methods of attracting, managing, and retaining such talent. Of course, we'd love to have this be an interactive session, so please send us your questions. We'll try and address them later in the webinar. So my first question for my fellow panelists. In today's environment, the very definition of talent is changing. So given that, what's the new definition of talent, and how is the industry responding to it? Manu, want to take a first crack?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, for the introduction as well. So, as an industry analyst, when we interact with banks and financial institutions, one of the common problem statements we hear is whenever there are new compliance initiatives, new regulations, banks tend to gravitate towards a single solution, which is staff up as many operational teams to solve and get ahead of that compliance issue. What that essentially does is, while it gives you a temporary leverage, but soon the banks do realize that that it's quite inefficient, and not always they're able to solve for the core problem. Take KYC as a process, right? Several banks, and including the ones that we have on the webinar today, they have hundreds, possibly thousands of people doing KYC remediation work. It's been going on for the last probably 8, maybe 10 years now. And when we're no close to getting to a solution where the remediation backlog is finally behind us, we still have a lot of backlog and we continuously are looking to get rid of it. So more recently, what we started hearing is that there's a shift in the thought process. Instead of as a bank, I don't want to staff up people. Instead, I want to solve for the underlying problem, which in this case being KYC remediation. But there are other similar problem statements like reducing incidences of fraud, ensuring better compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So as a bank, if I'm trying to solve for it, I don't necessarily need just operational teams. There's a pretty big role for them, but there's other sets of roles as well. So banks have started dividing their talent pyramid into stuff which can be automated, which can be very easily driven through technology, versus keeping more judgment intensive, really the pieces where really human intervention is required. That is what is really going towards the actual employee base. And as banks try and do that, they've quickly realized that there is one type of skill set which is becoming even more popular than any others, which is the ability to understand both the domain part of the picture as well as the technology capabilities. And bridging the gap between those two is what we are seeing as come up as a new role, which is defined as bilingual talent. And that is where a lot of the financial institutions are now headed towards in order to solve for their compliance issues, their financial crime compliance related pieces, and any other regulatory pieces that they need to be compliant with.
Thanks, Manu. I particularly like your description of today's talent pyramid. I think it's very valid. Anandi, you've got a lot of day-to-day responsibility for nurturing staff transformation, for preparing for readiness for new age skills. So from your perspective, how would you describe the new definition of talent?
Rightfully, as Manu described it, we're actually witnessing this mega change in the industry around definition of talent. And I actually see it manifesting itself in more ways than one. The first big trend that we are seeing is what we are calling as the rise of the investigator rather than the traditional analyst or aggregator in this business. This is happening because, traditionally, owing to the scale and the pressing need for speed, AFC's processes were treated more like large-scale banking back office operations, and they were typically sliced and diced into tasks that were carried out by fragmented pool of analysts. These people did not necessarily understand or have a full view to the results of their decisions. And as a result, what happened was with growing regulatory scrutiny, lapses started being detected. And then banks fast realized that the quality of decision making is critical and quality of human investigator therefore becomes paramount. This drove, therefore, the increased focus on investigative skills rather than a traditional analyst, driven by the need for quality decisions that went beyond the script with clear accountability for the outcomes that it drives. The other trend or the theme is that driven by these human in loop AI operating models that Manu just spoke of, where the bottom of the pyramid, which was traditionally a large part of data gathering and transactional work, has got totally disrupted, and human effort there is becoming redundant. This used to occupy 40-50% of the effort, but this implies the human workforce that now sits on the top of the pyramid has to be far more superior in terms of judgment and subjectivity. Also, in this evolved model, this has ushered in a generation of bilingual talent, which Manu just spoke of, which comprises high quality investigators. It has technologists, data scientists, process engineers, and value started getting delivered at the intersection of these skills, which is technical prowess and domain expertise, not necessarily one versus another. The third big change that we're seeing is the huge need for talent agility, which is a very important characteristic, in fact, very key to success in this new model. It's driven by the fact that regulations are changing nearly every single day. So how do we bring in talent which has the curiosity and the ability to keep ahead of the times and keep learning whatever is the new regulation that applies to their processes and to their decisions? And of course, there's this huge second element of change in technology itself, which means you're constantly pushing the boundaries of man-machine interaction, and complexity of problem solving for human beings is increasing. So therefore, there is that much more agility required in moving to the next level of competence as far as judgment is concerned. And lastly, I feel there is a significant need to look at leadership talent that is driving these operating models, because they are witnessing a lot of change. They need to keep with the times. They have a man-machine operating model to look after vis-a-vis just people in the past. So how do we actually groom these leaders and help them to actually run models of the futures is going to be key. So that in a nutshell, Jeff, is my view on talent for this industry today and the days to come.
Very helpful. Thanks, Anandi. Staying with you, Anandi, both you and Manu, I think interestingly, have used the term bilingual talent and noted its importance. I think it's a very aptly descriptive term. So Anandi, can you elaborate on that further?
Sure, Jeff. We just spoke of the skills and the fact that the half-life of these skills is decreasing at an alarming pace. So what that means is organizations have to take on the responsibility to constantly upskill, reskill, and sustain the knowledge at scale. And to be able to do this, we need to be able to step back and create a large, bold vision and have the ability to execute to it. Just to give you the example, at Genpact, we have addressed it by building a global virtual learning platform called Genome. This provides easy access and relevant content continuously to our AFC talent, which is distributed across the globe. The content and context that it provides is supposed to be bilingual because it involves creating curriculum that's not just theoretical, which is the theory of AFC, but exposes learners to practical applications such as how do you write a good case, what are the newer data sources that we can access and actually strengthen it, what are the technological advancements and what does it mean to the operation, and what are the latest news and views and regulations. So bunch of all of this needs to constantly get pushed out in this learning framework. The other important need is this learning framework should address the entire life cycle of learning. So recognizing that ready talent is not necessarily available in the market, we have made investments to build talent across the talent pyramid. And one of the things we're doing is for entry level positions, we have partnered with universities across our key global centers to take them in and refresh them, train them on AFC fundamentals. Once they're into the system, how do you keep up with their growth aspirations? How do you ensure the organization is agile and you can move people from one level of competence, from one skill to another within AFC? To be able to do that, we actually created visual talent pyramids where we are building bridge programs that help people move from one chosen point to another in either a given domain or to help them switch to a adjacent domain. The other big need, which is important when you build learning frameworks of this nature, is to build the refresh model. So we're trying to do that by building bite-sized modules that are accessible through the mobile so that people can learn, short capsules at a time. We're also creating now learning bots, which will do assisted refresh at an individual level on topics of their choice. Just to ensure all of this aspiration that we have as an organization is real, we have actually taken on goals of creating 40 to 60% of our lateral and entry level positions through these interventions next year. Considering that there's a vast amount of personalization and real-time changes involved, the entire model is actually executed through Genome platform, and that it helps us distribute this information. In addition to the content that goes out, we also have master apprenticeship arrangements called Guru Connects so that people can reach out to super SMEs and learn. We have also baked in super specialization for key talent through external agencies, certifying agencies, and built into this softer skills which are ever so critical, such as storytelling, judgment, articulation, etc., so that the entire learning process is holistic. So in a summary, in a nutshell, Jeff, this is really our very ambitious personalized learning framework. We're glad that the journey has begun. We've made the investment and we will be evolving constantly.
Thanks, Anandi. Very, very comprehensive answer. Manu, of course, would like your view on the need for bilingual talent in this new digital era. Also very interested if you can give us an example of where that bilingual ability is critical, for example, with regard to threats arising from new technologies.
Sure, Jeff. So let me do this. Let me take half a step back for just a second. So we're living in the age of digital technologies. We're living in the age of data, right? The gig economy has really exploded. So what what that has done is the age-old way of doing banking, that in itself has changed. So we keep talking about how there are leaks, there are data leaks, there are financial compliance risks, there are financial crimes happening every day. We do need to realize that how are these things really happening? We talk about tools and technologies and all sorts of database assets, but the same exact assets are also available to the exact people who are trying to hack into the banking system to violate the safety of a banking environment. And that is a very big realization that we need to have. In order to be ahead of some of these fraudsters and some of these hackers, we really need to make sure that we step up our game when it comes to both technology and people and arm them together. For example, so you talked about new technologies. Cryptocurrency has been one of the biggest buzzwords of this century. It's based on a technology called blockchain. And if you look at this year alone, there has been $1 billion plus losses on various crypto exchanges across the globe. So blockchain, which is supposedly an unhackable technology, the entire promise of blockchain was increased security, higher mutability, et cetera, and that technology itself hasn't lasted that long. We have had multiple breakages this year alone. Who knows what's going to happen in the next? So clearly, no matter how many guardrails we put in place, there is always a way for hackers and fraudsters to get around it. And that's where it becomes all the more important for us to look at our entire talent ecosystem more holistically. So, and again, taking one more example, right? Areas like transaction screening, fraud monitoring, it requires your employees to go through hundreds, thousands, possibly millions of transactions. Do you really think somebody can do that manually? It's virtually impossible. And that is where the role of technology really comes in handy. And how do you make sure that you have different people looking at different aspects of the same transaction and identifying what's gone wrong, take the right interventions? That is where the role of talent comes into play. So what we really need to do is divide our talent imperatives into multiple layers. You need to have the domain experts who can understand why particular financial crime instances are happening, why the crime was conducted in the first place, what led to it, what are some of the underlying patterns behind it. Then somebody needs to look at the data that corresponds to that particular instance and build out algorithms to detect that when the next instance happens. You need the engineers who can codify those algorithms, and then obviously you need the operation teams to actually take the right set of interventions when a case of fraud or compliance failure is observed. And those are the set of different skill sets, in fact, that we need in order to make a proper financial crime compliance environment. And finally, the ability to bridge between these 5-6 different types of roles, that is where the earlier definition of bilingual talent sets in. So how do you make sure that you understand the entire stack part of it and bring these capabilities together and enable a truly safe banking environment where the consumers can feel safe that, okay, hey, the data is protected, the transactions are protected, and any instances of fraud are going to get reported and in a real-time manner.
Thanks, Manu. Very, very thoughtful observations. So I think we've well established the importance of attracting appropriately skilled talent. We need those skills in this new, very challenging era. But as we know, doing this is easier said than done. So to my mind, the critical question is, how does a financial institution attract, manage, motivate, train, and retain that talent, the talent it needs, which is really at the heart of why we set up this webinar. Manu, want to take a first crack at that?
Sure, Jeff. I think you're hitting on a very pivotal question. It's a question that comes up literally every day from any of the banks, financial institutions that we interact with. So if you look at the entire ecosystem of talent, if you have some of these bilingual talents, these are the kind of employees that you want to retain, right? These are the employees that if a financial institution has them, you want to do anything in your power to make sure that you keep them with you and they do not feel the need to move elsewhere. But one of the problems in this industry is that if you don't have that talent, or even if you do have, you never have enough, and you're always looking for more, and it's almost getting impossible to hire such talent externally. In fact, take the example of Visa and MasterCard. they announced some changes in their underlying dispute resolution process. And it didn't take long for Visa to come out with an announcement that they do not have sufficient employees to handle that kind of change. Hence, what they are trying to do is pay their employees to get trained. Almost 15,000 of their employees are going to get trained in newer processes. And that's how they're going to actually staff up the team to handle their new dispute resolution. So clearly, Visa also realizes that hiring such talent externally is going to be exceedingly difficult. And that's why they're looking inwards to train their existing employees. And that's exactly what a lot of financial institutions need to do as well. You need to find talent where it resides. And you also need to adapt your own training practices to make sure you train your existing employees better. So for example, there are a few new age training techniques that can come in really handy. Things like micro-learning, space learning, gamification. All of these are techniques which are being deployed every day. So micro-learning is basically nothing but breaking a broader module of training into more bite-sized pieces. So you deploy smaller pieces at the right time, which is called space learning. Then bringing that pieces to your employees at the right time in a smaller fashion, it actually helps improve retention, makes your training more effective, makes it more long-lasting. And then applying gamification techniques on top of it really helps engages employee in a much more holistic fashion. And the combination of some of these training techniques is what is really helping the banks elevate that conversation, make the employees more efficient, make them more trainable as well. And then the last aspect that we also need to look at is when we keep focusing on the training part of it, right? But we need to look at the entire hire to retire cycle, as well as one of the key elements of it, which is the environment in which the employees operate. So you can train your employees to the nth extent, but guess what? If you don't arm them with the right tools, if you don't give them the right bots, the data sources, and hundreds of other assets that can really make them more efficient, it's going to be very hard for you to retain them. You need to keep throwing more challenging problem statements at them. You need to make sure that they continuously engage. Because do realize that as a bank, I'm not just fighting with each other to retain talent. I'm now also fighting with some of the big techs, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons of the world. All of these companies have gotten into the financial industry as well. And they are the ones who are also taking away talent from banks. So if I'm trying to defend my talent, my employees, that is where I really need to look for. And in fact, do remember that when we talk about some of the training pieces, that is where the real engagement happens, right? The employees obviously get their stuff done, but if you really arm them with better tools and environment, that's what makes them really productive. And somebody said it really well. So some of the best engineers that we know of, they're actually pretty lazy, right? And the reason why they're best is their laziness, because they're so lazy that they would automate everything. They don't want to spend a single day working on things that are mundane, and they would find the best ways to automate that. So lazy engineers are the best one. And that's what is the mantra for the entire technology industry. And that's what we also need to adopt as banks.
Thanks, Manu. Very interesting take at the end. I'll have to think about that. Anandi, same question for you. I've heard you describe the anti-financial crime staffing environment that we're now in as a war for talent. So put another way, how does a financial institution win that war?
So I love the lazy engineer quote from Manu, and you know, makes me think why I wasn't an engineer in the first place. But in any case, we are in this space and we've got to address the question you have for now, Jeff. Definitely it's a battlefield out there for talent. And I think every financial institution is carrying the scars of war over here, war for talent. And the best possible way is to actually think through and put in efforts in a planned manner to build aspiration and longevity. It's not going to happen by accident. It's not going to happen through piecemeal interventions. It's only going to happen when you look at the end-to-end hire to retire cycle, as Manu put it, and really implant the right interventions for people. It's a long subject, but I wanted to share some suggestions and best practices from my experience. I think the most critical is to find a way of building aspiration. This means making the career decision for each employee on your team worthwhile for them and offering them something really tangible for having joined your workplace. At Genpact, for example, for AFC talent, we've gone out and on a limb made a bold promise saying, we will make you or help you become the best investigators in the world. And that's a tangible promise in my view. And therefore, all our learning and development initiatives, our rewarding mechanism, our performance management mechanism, every single thing is geared towards making this promise come alive for our employees. The other important thing, and it holds true more for millennials than others, and even for many of us, is finding purpose. It is our responsibility to help these employees connect the dots between the decisions that they make and the larger good that this decision creates for the bank and the community per se. Um, Increasingly, we're working on communicating how their decisions or interventions or any contributions that they make are making the world a safer place. This promotes stickiness, loyalty to the cause, and therefore to the organization. And it's a very, very important messaging which is often ignored and unfortunately not celebrated enough. And I think we need to find mechanisms of doing this well. Um, the related point is typically because I spoke of this being treated as banking back office processes historically, the metrics are geared towards guess what? Productivity, speed, or even accuracy. It's very important to ensure that the reward mechanism goes beyond that and incentivizes a culture of curiosity, learning, investigative excellence, research. This needs to be a really, really thought through system to reward quality as well. And then, of course, there was a point which Manu also made about keeping employees engaged. Um, One way is, of course, through the learning process. The other is constantly throwing out creative challenges and contests. Not keeping the product build team separate from the team that's working on business per se, day-to-day business. Actually, pull them into a room, help them collaborate, and come out with newer means of fighting financial crime and bringing out newer capabilities in the team. At Genpact, we actively engage our teams in these journeys, and we actually call ourselves a large company with the heart of a startup, which means everybody has an opportunity to contribute, collaborate, and make a difference. So these were some points I thought of making today, Jeff, but interesting topic, and we can keep going on.
Thanks, Anandi. I know you well enough, by the way, to know that you could never be lazy, even if you were an engineer. So staying with you, Anandi, with regard to talent acquisition, you and Manu have made clear that a lot is changing: surroundings, environment, culture, training, certainly the tools that we give staff. So with such drastic change comes risks and challenges. How do you feel they're best dealt with by a financial institution?
Sure, we live in extremely dangerous times, and I can think of plenty of risks targeting us each and every day. The biggest risk is flight risk. We make this huge effort and song and dance to build talent, but our attempts can be extremely feeble and cause us to lose talent if we somehow lose the orientation between what they need at any given point in time and what we're delivering to them. So how do we ensure that our retention strategy and our engagement strategy has its ear to the ground at any given point in time, and we stay true to the real needs of the employee, and are open and flexible to evolution as things change, as the industry progresses. Easier said than done, and in the single most important job of a leader in this space. Because talent that you've cultivated and lost is extremely, is irreplaceable. You can't just keep buying them off, because you need cultural inclusivity as well. Uh, the other thing which is being spoken about a lot, and it holds in models, in these blended models with AI and machine learning, is the bias in decision making that this introduces. There's a lot of conversation around ethics around AI, and do we have the right representation when these models are being created, and we're not passing as a group, as a homogeneous group, our biases onto the decisions the machines make. And the best possible way is to ensure whoever's in charge of these programs brings in huge amount of diversity that represents a cross section of decision making abilities, and therefore whatever is behind the scenes in terms of writing the rules, etc. So that's another risk I see. The other thing which oftentimes we see in large organization is there is plenty of investment and will to make changes of this nature, but is there enough organizational flexibility or elasticity to ensure all of these actually reach its stated end goal? So if you have a technology, are you actually able to execute it to the ground and see through the results? If you've trained people in multiple skills, are you able to pick them up and move them when the business needs it? So these are some of the things which comes with the culture of the organization. Important to ensure, irrespective of size, they have to be agile enough to move this kind of bilingual talent around. And lastly, goes without saying, change in regulation always is a red flag, always poses a huge risk and calls for huge amount of attention and hard work by all teams concerned in order to be really imbibed and executed. So that was broadly, a gist of what I thought are the risks in this model.
Thanks, Anandi. Manu, of course, would be interested in your take on this as well, including if you could also speak about how a financial institution is best able to keep skilled workers motivated in this enormously changing environment.
Sure, Jeff. Motivation is probably one of the biggest challenges for any financial institution today. So the age-old way of motivating employees, where you have maybe some recognition pieces, some career paths, and it was maybe a one-size-fit-all kind of an approach, that needs to evolve. Increasingly, especially with bilingual talent, we are seeing that personalization is the real thing that we need to solve for. So every employee has their own set of priorities. For somebody, it's maybe wellness. For somebody else, maybe it's career progression. While for somebody else, it might just be work-life balance. So how do you really personalize the motivation aspects of each and every employee that you have? Make sure that you address their needs, and that is what in turn going to improve retention. It's going to improve motivation, etc., etc. And it's easier said than done. The ability for financial institutions to attract and then retain talent is also hinged on the fact that they need to continuously challenge their mental faculties, right? You need to continuously throw more and more challenging problems at these employees so that they continue to feel that, okay, they're growing in their path. And at the same time, anything which is more mundane, which is more day-to-day kind of an activity, that is the one that you're taking away from them, letting them automate it. So we talked about earlier around how you're beginning to compete with a lot bigger set of players, right? It's no longer just the banks, it's the big techs. In fact, if you look at the top 10 employers in US, you don't see too many banks there. What you see is companies like Walmart, Google, Facebook, so on and so forth. And these are the companies which have now used their retail network, their online presence, their social media presence to really drive a lot of financial transactions. Walmart offers credit at each of their stores. You can apply for credit cards. You can actually use Walmart to transfer payments from one location to another as well. So they're entering the financial space. And so is Google and Amazon and all of these other firms. And increasingly, they're going to start attracting talent from the traditional banks because they really need those people to help them navigate the complex compliance environment, the financial risk environment, et cetera, et cetera. And that is where a lot of the banks are beginning to lose out talent, not to each other, but really to some of these larger technology firms. And in fact, if you look at some of the recent surveys around the best places to work with, even these firms are no longer the top ones. Facebook and Google, in fact, very recently dropped out of the top 10 list. And it's some of the newer startups coming in, some of the fintechs now coming in as well. So how do you make sure that between the fintechs, the big techs, as well as the traditional banks, the mix of talent isn't moving too quickly? And even if it is, maybe we can partner up with some of them to actually get that talent back into our fold. So those are some of the common problem statements, and that's how that's my take on how banks can improve some of the motivation for their existing employees.
Thanks, Manu. So we've received some questions. I'd like to get to a few of them before we end. So one is, acquiring the right digital and domain skills for any financial crime staff is crucial for our bank, but doing it at speed is a challenge. So how can we most quickly reskill our AML and fraud risk management teams? Manu, would you like to take a crack at that?
Sure, Jeff. Let me think about it. See, it's definitely not an easy problem to solve for. Whenever, and we talked about earlier in the webinar as well, that whenever new regulations, new compliance initiatives come to bear, getting teams ramped up quickly is a very common problem. And in fact, most times it's not just the volume part of the picture, it's also about getting the right people in the right locations that becomes a challenge. So in my experience, what we have generally seen work well is a combination approach, right? You may want to leverage something like your in-house operations to really narrow down what the compliance initiative means, what are some of your reporting structures going to look like, what are your org structures going to look like. But then you leverage your captive presence, your third-party presence to really staff up some of those teams. And then looking at the teams from a location perspective, making sure that you have them in the right places, not just going after the volume part of the picture, but also thinking about, okay, hey, is this an work which can really be done out of, let's say, US or in India or Philippines or somewhere else? So bringing the mix of that location angle, leveraging these multiple resources, and then finally the piece that we have been talking about all along, how can I reduce some of the volumes of work and make it more automated, make it more straight through, versus really the work which requires high judgment? That is the one that we really want the employees to handle. So a combination of those approach can, first of all, reduce your need to really ramp up the team to the extent you were thinking about, and then also put the teams in a place where they're going to be more sustainable over a longer period, as compared to just doing a knee-jerk reaction, hiring hundreds, possibly thousands of resources, only to realize a few months later that I probably don't need as many.
Yep, very true. I think those days are gone. We've got a couple of questions touching upon what we had previously discussed, competition with fintechs. Anandi, do you have any thoughts on other strategies we haven't mentioned for winning this battle, if you will, against the fintechs?
Banks against the fintechs, is that the question?
Yes, basically, yeah, I would say that's the question.
Yeah, because that's oftentimes discussed. And well, I think that definitely there's a lot going for the banks and there's a lot going for the fintechs. Banks, for once, have this huge repository of knowledge and legacy of years and years of dealing with the regulators. They also have a very mature compliance function and a lens of looking at processes through a risk-based approach. So I think these are certainly some of the things that talent considers when they think of making their career in this space, and banks have an edge from that perspective. On the other hand, the new tech fins and the fintechs have the huge technology advantage of doing things with speed, and of course now being seen as the employer of choice, etc. So I won't say there is really one against the other. I actually think there is an opportunity in the industry for the banks, the fintechs, tech fins to collaborate, because this is not a competitive space. They have to fight crime and they have to fight that together. So if the best case scenario would be if there were to be an industry utility that brings in the best of both worlds and helps the entire community solve for this, that would be the best case scenario. But Till then, I think banks and tech firms will need to converge and try to bring in as much of the skills that they don't have from each other. So, not an easy answer, Jeff, but my vote would be for the industry utility.
Very interesting. Manu, a question for you, if you will. How can my bank develop a blueprint that can give us a complete picture of what skills we have, what skills we need now and in the future, where we can combine machine and human skills, and how do we best shepherd this change? Sort of a complex question.
Yeah, it's a pretty layered question, I thought, Jeff. So let me start with a quick reference to that one. So in India, right? So it's NASSCOM, the Indian association, which really tracks the IT BPO industry. So they did this entire survey, right? And one of the things that they also discovered was a large part of the workforce that is currently being leveraged out of India, that's going to get outdated if there's not proper training provided to them in real time. In fact, the estimate that we came up with was almost 500,000 jobs in Indian IT BPO industry. It's going to get impacted in just next 3 to maybe 4 years. So there's a significant retraining exercise that needs to happen at an overall industry level, and that, in essence, also is the thesis of the problem which this particular question reflects. So the first thing that we need to do as a bank is take a stock of the situation, right? What are the skill sets that we really have today? What are the kind of employees that we have hired? What locations are they in? And what are the activities or tasks that they're really engaged in? Several of these tasks may not be around for too long. Some of them maybe have become redundant already, but we're doing it for legacy reasons. So taking a blueprint is, first of all, starts with actually mapping out those skill sets, as well as what are some of the key roles that these employees are serving. In fact, there are a few tools which can actually help you accelerate that piece as well. So very recently, in the last maybe 2 years, there's this entire conversation around process mining, which has really picked up. So process mining is where you have tools which look through logs of how your certain transactions are getting monitored, which employees are taking care of them, how your workforce management systems are operating, and really looking at those logs generated to identify the flow of transactions, where are things getting broken out. And that can provide you a very clear picture of how your bank operates at the grassroots level. And that's probably going to be your starting point as to say, okay, hey, what are the skill sets that I have today? What are the places where maybe there was a miss and I did not have the right people to look at the transaction, which is why it took longer, or possibly certain anomalies got left undetected. So use of those tools, mapping out of the skill sets, and then looking at those skill sets more critically in terms of identifying what's required versus something which can be automated versus next skills that I need to really put in place. That's how I would probably go about that journey.
Thanks, Manu. So let's do one final question, but let me try and combine two. We've gotten in a question about how can you create a risk-based mindset culture in financial crime compliance. To my mind, culture begins with tone at the top. It begins with leadership and senior management, setting the appropriate incentives, setting the appropriate policies, being walking the walk, not just talking the talk. But let me combine that with the notion that Anandi mentioned about the importance of leadership, having an appropriate understanding of new digital tools, of leadership, also being bilingual, if you will. So another question, our senior executives are banking industry veterans who have vast industry knowledge, but they struggle with the nuances of the digital world. How can we address this gap and create a talent development plan for mid-level and senior executives? Nandi?
I love this question. Thanks, Jeff, for pointing it to me, because I see it play out day in and day out. The speed at which things are getting obsolete. I would say leaders are getting more and more insecure about the role that they play in managing this new environment, and the organization has an extremely critical role to play here in helping them become successful at their jobs. If you notice, a lot of the programs, traditionally training programs, it is assumed that leaders will just realize what they need to go after as far as digital skills are concerned, read a few magazines and news items, and automatically get upskilled. And that's typically the lingo or the word going around that, oh, just read it up and you'll be there. Reality is they need as much of a structured and deep intervention as the people in their teams. So there has to be enough thought around what is it that the leader in this team needs over and above what the investigators and other skills in that team needs to be successful. And put, I would say, a strong digital data science technology immersion program in place, which is customized to begin at the level at which that individual leader is. The other is, of course, rewarding the culture of promoting this across leadership, and building agility in teams so that leaders also imbibe that as a part of the culture and drive that. So net, I would say not to leave it for chance. It's very, very critical that the leaders get addressed first, because in the entire in the process of change management, the leader comes first. So if he or she is not bought into the process, it's not going to go down the chain. So there has to be a systemic effort. It has to be customized.
Thanks, Anani. Very much agree. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I think in very quick summary, we've well established that in spite of enormous and ongoing technological advances, human talent is more critical than ever. The challenges in attracting, managing, and retaining that talent are great, but they are manageable with proper planning, effort, and commitment. Many thanks to Anandi and Manu for your time and insights, and many thanks to all of you for participating. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.